Hello everyone, welcome to Matt's Corner of Gem Cutting. I was recently in Tucson for the gem shows where I was able to pick up a few interesting stones that I may facet in future videos. In man-made or synthetic materials, I picked up some X-cube prisms, which are made of 4 glass prisms put together into a cube and can display some cool light properties. I also have a good-sized chunk of champagne moissanite. This piece here is polycrystalline sphalerite, and the large piece is clear lab sapphire. In natural form materials, I got a couple decent pieces of Ethiopian opal. I also picked up a large chunk of clear quartz just to have on hand. This is a decently sized piece of nice rose quartz. And this brown one is a huge piece of clean smoky quartz. I still have 2 more massive clear quartz pieces to do before I can do any of these ones, but the smaller stones may become videos somewhere between doing the massive stones. There have been a lot of people wanting to see me facet an amethyst. I didn't find any pieces that I wanted to work with in Tucson this year, but I did pick up some decently sized pieces from a show in Utah a couple years back. I've selected the largest of those pieces for this video. I didn't keep a note on where the piece originated from, but I am pretty sure they were from Brazil. The rough piece weighs in at 655 carats or 131 grams. It has some color zoning going on with some areas almost clear and some purple lines throughout the stone. If the stone is viewed stacking those colored lines on top of each other, it makes the stone's color more evened out. So the stone can be cut to show the color zoning or have more of an even color depending on the direction that the stone is oriented for faceting. The rough piece is fairly oddly shaped with several large divots and a fracture that I will cut out. I want to facet this piece for more of an even color when viewing from the crown, so I will be orienting it on one of its ends. I want to show what effect some frosted facets can do, so I added some to a bulkier hexagon design that I created a while back for quartz and adjusted the angles to where the frosted facets should reflect around in the stone and look pretty neat. Frosted facets are facets that are intentionally left unpolished to create visible contrast or patterns within a stone. Now, before I get started on this stone, you may have noticed that my workspace has been upgraded. This is thanks to FlexiSpot, who is the sponsor of this video. They sent me one of their ergonomic C7 office chairs about 4 months ago. What do I think of the chair after using it during that time? I've been using it as my main work chair since receiving it. It beats any of the other chairs that I've used up to this point. The mesh is comfortable and the chair has a ton of adjustability. I've been taking advantage of the forward tilt feature that allows me to sit more comfortably when leaning forward while working. I do love the lower lumbar support. It feels really nice having that support on my lower back. I do think that it would be nice if the whole backrest were able to tilt just a little further forward for more support while I am working in the leaning forward position, but overall it is a pretty awesome chair. To pair with the chair, FlexiSpot has recently sent me one of their popular E7 adjustable standing desks as well. The desk can be adjusted up or down at the touch of a button, and there are 4 presets available for saving height positions to easily return to. I've saved the height I like for sitting along with the height for standing. The movement is very smooth and has a weight capacity of 355 pounds. Unlike the glass top desk that I was using, I can actually clamp my desk attachments to it, and a stone is less likely to chip if I drop one on it compared to the glass. Anyway, it is a pretty sturdy desk, the frame is good and heavy, and it looks pretty sleek as well. The links for these products can be found in the video's description. I'll be giving this amethyst a preform by hand to remove the divots and fracture. I'll also be giving the stone a general shape and grinding in a flat for dopping to. I am doing this using an 80 grit lap. Amethyst is the purple variation of quartz. It is a common gemstone that can be found all over the world, though the top producer of the gemstone is Brazil. The name amethyst comes from a Greek word, forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, amethustos, which means not drunken. The Greeks believed that having amethyst could protect the stone owner from intoxication and is still considered a metaphysical property of amethyst. Before large deposits of amethyst were found around the 18th century, amethyst was numbered among the most precious gemstones and was highly valued. The finding of massive deposits of amethyst led to a significant drop in value, though it is still widely popular and is February's birthstone. With a hardness of 7, it is a good stone for most jewelry. I finish off the preform of the stone by going back over the stone with 180 grit so that the surface of the stone isn't so rough. It is good to wet and wipe down the machine and surrounding area after using the heavier grits to remove the overspray that has now dried out. This helps keep dust out of the air. The little bits of stone can also act as an abrasive that can wear at the moving components of the machine, so keeping the mass and components clean will keep them lasting longer. Here's the stone with the preform done. I started giving it a little of the hexagon shape that it will become. This divot is a little bit of the fracture that went into the stone. A little bit of stone along the fracture popped out while grinding. That will finish cutting out when I get to working on the stone after it is dopped. To find where to attach the dop stick to, I draw a general hexagon shape on the surface of the stone and measure in to find the center point. I draw aligning marks through the center point for a visual reference when aligning the dop stick. So I've been playing around with wax a little bit since I've done the fabled fasting machine video, so I decided to dop this amethyst with wax instead of my normal glue method. The wax isn't as quick to dop as gluing because the wax, dop, and stone all have to be heated to get a good bond. The wax also gets in the way of alignment marks I put on the dop, making it not as easy to align perfectly with where I put the center point. Attaching the dop with wax took about 15 minutes, where gluing takes about 1 to 2 minutes. On the flip side, gluing takes time to set, whereas wax dopping is ready to work with right afterward. I found that using wax has worked better for keeping tiny stones under 3 millimeters wide on the dop, where superglue was often failing. I haven't had very much issue with gluing larger stones. We'll see how well the wax holds up on this one. Since I used wax, I am able to start on this stone right away. I am back to using the 80 grit lap to roughen the stone. Basically, I am removing the bulk of the material that will come off from the faceting, bringing the stone close to the size and shape that it will become before moving on to using finer grits. Typically, finer grits cut slower, and though this isn't nearly as big as the clear quartz I've done, it is still a fairly big stone, so I want to get it in somewhat close to the size here to save some time later on. I started by grinding in the facets that will form the point of the pavilion close to forming a center point. I then rough in the girdle facets, followed by just a couple of the major sets of pavilion facets. This grit is really rough on the stone, so when sizing the stone there needs to be enough material left to be cut away, working through the finer grits to remove any subsurface or other damage left by the heavier grit. If a stone is small enough, it is good to just skip using any rougher grits. I start with a 600 grit when I can on smaller stones, or do a light preform on stones that can use it, not going heavier than a 180 grit. Okay, so I was about done with the rough-in when the stone popped off between shots. There is a lot of shock and vibration that goes through the stone at this grit level. There is a little bit of wax that broke off and was left on the stone. Maybe the stone wasn't quite as warm as it could have been for a better bond, who knows? Whatever the reason, it came off. Honestly, better here than later on, so as long as I can get it attached pretty close to where it was, it'll be good. My larger stones have all held on just fine with super glue, but I'll give the wax another shot here so that I can just keep grinding away on the stone today. I am also ready to move on to the next grinding lap, so there won't be as much shock on the bond. I realign one of the girdle facets on the master lap to get the orientation of the stone back close to where it was. Checking the height of the girdle facets, there is a slight difference going around the stone, but I managed to get it close enough to continue on. Since I am done with the 80 grit, I give the machine a quick wipe down. This is how the stone is looking after all that. It is now good to go again. Next, I will be using a 300 grit lap. I start with the girdle as my design is a girdle first design. The girdle facets are all cut to the same depth, and then the rest of the facets are meet point based off the girdle facets. A lot of meet point diagrams out there start with a center point that then forms the girdle and other facet meets. At this grit level, I am doing what is basically a finer rough-in. I go through all of the sets of facets this time, but I am not taking the time to be very exact on the meets. I use this grit to remove the wear from the 80 lap and remove the rest of the extra bulk so that the main cutting can progress fairly quickly. I do the main faceting with a 600 grit lap. Here I slow down, taking my time to keep the facets even and accurate. The angle stop on the mast is set to 90 degrees for faceting the girdle facets. When the facet is ground in close to the stop, the sound of the cutting becomes quieter. Using even pressure and going until the grinding feels and sounds the same should produce a fairly even girdle outline. From there, I continue on faceting in the rest of the facets in their meet point order from girdle to point, checking the facets often as they are ground in to get them to where they meet without overcutting. The remaining grit sizes cut very slowly and aren't used to take off very much material, so the stone should be cut to size with the facets very close to their intended positions before moving on from this stage. Up next is the pre-polish on the pavilion side of the stone. I will be doing this using 3000 grit diamond on a tin alloy bat lap. The paste that I am using is dispersible in oil or water. I prefer using water as a lubricant if using it for quartz. I'll start back with the girdle and run through the faceting sequence again. I need to grind in far enough with the pre-polish to remove all of the pitting and larger scratches left from the 600 grit. The surface of the facets should be left looking fairly smooth with a dull polished look. There is a bit of contrast between the pre-polished facets and the ones still at 600 grit. If I were to not polish some of these facets, that is what would be called leaving them frosted to keep that contrast in the design of the stone. There are two types of frosting styles. One is leaving the whole facet frosted, and the other is frosting just the edges of facets, which puts more of a highlighted-like border around them. 1200 is a good grit size for frosting facets. There isn't really enough contrast at 3000. I'm going to be only adding some frosted edges to this amethyst, so I will take the pavilion facets all the way through polish before adding those. I am using a dark side lap for polishing. I lightly wet the lap and use cerium oxide powder to create a slurry by rubbing the powder into the water and around the surface of the lap until there is a good coating on there. I use a spray bottle to control the moisture and run the lap at a lower speed to keep the slurry from just washing right off the lap. Cerium works for polishing stones with the hardness of quartz or softer, so up to around 7 on the hardness scale. I will actually use diamond polish for any stones that take it well. Cerium oxide, however, has worked best for polishing quartz for me, so that is what I use. Like the previous steps, I run back through all of the facets until they have an even, nicely polished, glossy look without any major scratches. I start to see some play of colors while polishing due to dispersion of light passing through the stone separating into various colors. Gems with higher dispersion will look more fiery. Amethyst has a lower dispersion, but the fine polish is allowing us to see some dispersion happening. To add the frosted facets, I will be using one of my well-worn in 600 grit laps. The surface of this lap feels more like a 1200 grit at this point. The frosted facets will be very small and will cut in super fast, so I will not be turning on the machine to do this. I just wet the one side of the lap and lightly rub the stone against the surface while properly set to the position for the frosted facets. Any little angle error can cause a noticeable size difference from one end of the frosted facet to the other. So I start with a very light test to check the facet and make any corrections before finishing it out. Once it is set perfectly, I can add in all the frosted facets for that tier, and even not running the machine, these still grind in super fast. I am only adding frosted facets around the facets that form the tip. The design should reflect those frosted facets around, making it look like they are all throughout the stone. Here the frosted facets are finished, giving those point facets a nice highlight. The red of the wax is showing through the stone, giving it a reddish hue. That would be a pretty color, but that is not the actual color of the stone that we are seeing here. The frosting finishes off the pavilion, so now I will transfer the stone so that I can facet the crown. I will be using glue for the transfer. Where wax melts fairly easily and the stone has to be warm to get a good bond, I have found that wax to wax transfers tend to allow the stone to shift during transfer, as heating the stone will cause the wax from the original bond to melt, allowing the stone to shift. Even if it is just a slight shift, it will be noticed when cutting the crown facets by the girdle being thicker on one side of the stone and thinner on the other, even when the break facets are aligned parallel to each other perfectly around the crown of the stone. This is because the crown is tilted in orientation to the pavilion side of the stone. The off tilt is a pain to work with, so I will try to avoid having that happen. Once the glue has had plenty of time to set up, the wax stop side can easily be removed by using a little heat to melt the wax. I also removed most of the wax left on the stone so that it won't gum up my grinding discs. Like I did when the stone came off, I align one of the girdle facets to the lap to get the rotation of the stone close to begin with. I use a 180 grit lap for the rough end of the crown, but I first check the rotation alignment by cutting the first set of facets around the stone to see if they line up. The rotation is still a little off, and normally is to begin with, but this is easily corrected using the cheater knob. Rotation errors like this are easy to fix, but there is no easy cheater knob for correcting any errors in tilt. Hence why I try not to have any tilt errors to begin with, which can happen from redopping a stone that has come off or from transferring issues that can happen, like I mentioned could happen with wax to wax transfers. Having a quill that is off-centered on its rotation could also cause some tilt error after transferring. I go ahead and rough in all of the crown facets. I leave plenty of girdle thickness to be able to bring it in the rest of the way with 600 grit. Roughing in all of the facets lets me see that I have plenty of crown depth for this bulky deep design that has a domed, somewhat rose-cut-like crown. With the 600 grit, I size the girdle thickness to what looks appropriate for the size of the stone. It is pretty amazing how much contrast each step looks when compared to the step before. I mean, that's all that is really happening with cutting and polishing. With each grit used, the scratches look finer and finer until you can't see them at all, and that is what is called polished. It isn't really practical to try going straight to polish from a heavy grit, so that is why there is a group of grit sizes that the stone is run through in steps to remove wear from the previous step and prepare the stone to quickly take the next step. I do a minimum of 3 steps, usually 4 if I do some sort of rough-in, and sometimes 5 for very large stones. Some people do more steps, but the sequence that I have been sticking to has worked well for me. Sometimes quartz polishes really easily, and sometimes it just likes to be troublesome and not take a polish very well. It just seems to vary from piece to piece. This piece has some of what I think is called fishbone effect happening, if I remember that name right. This is a common thing for quartz. Some of the facets have some noticeable surface grooves and patterns that show up while polishing. This is because of something to do with the structure of the quartz. I don't know the details of why it happens, but it does. For the most part, this effect isn't really eye visible on this stone. Some amethysts that I have cut in the past have given me more trouble, but this one wasn't too difficult to polish. I am going to be leaving the crown like it is without a table facet. I thought the render without a table facet looked better than the one with a table. Since I am not doing a table, the stone is finished. I still need to let the glue dissolve off in acetone to remove the dop, but I can already see some of the patterns showing up from the design. It should look pretty interesting when the dop is off, so I'll impatiently let that soak and we'll see the finished piece when it comes out. Okay, here it is. It finished at 133.5 carats or 26.7 grams. It is 28 millimeters wide. The color zoning can be seen from a side profile, but the color is pretty even from the crown view. It looks really good with a light on it with a dark background. The center star shows up pretty distinctly and looks like it is splitting out towards the edges of the stone. The effect diminishes the further it is tilted, but still a pretty cool effect for only having some frosted facets right near the tip. I like what it is doing. It has to be aligned perfectly to see that center star. It wouldn't have that star if the table facet was cut in and the center area would look a bit different. I think that the value of the finished stone could be around $4,000. This amethyst is a little darker, so the frosting pattern shows up better under a light. It doesn't show through very well in low light, while brighter lighting really makes it pop. The finished shots don't show it very well, but the stone does have a bit of color flashes from dispersion. Frosted facets on the pavilion of stones show through better on lighter saturated stones, while frosted facets on the crown side show up better on darker stones. This has been a fun stone to work with. Let me know in the comments what you think of the frosted facets. Please hit that like button, and hopefully I can get another video out soon for you guys. Thanks for watching.